So I'm going to be focusing on the very famous phrase, Epstein didn't kill himself. So what I'm going to be doing is just kind of talking briefly around some of the reasons why people seem to think that he didn't kill himself and maybe some of the motives behind it. So Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell aged 66 on the 10th of August 2019, which was the day before he was meant to go to trial and potentially testify, revealing numerous names to the court of all the people involved with him. His ring was thought to have involved over 1,000 elite people, all of which would have reason to want him dead to prevent him from talking, including famously Bill Clinton, who flew in Epstein's Lolita Express plane 26 times. Now, I won't go too deeply into some of the other names, just because that is part of our little game at the end of conspiracy.
Yeah, on the subject of the Clintons briefly, I say the Clinton family, there's rumours they have had previous of bumping people off who have threatened them. So we say Hillary especially has been accused of several suicides by, we say, with 2 bullets to the back of the head sort of arrangements.
Right, yeah, exactly. And there's quite a big movement and theory behind the whole Clinton body count thing where a lot of people think they're responsible for quite a lot of murders and things going on and cover-ups. So it's, yeah, interesting, but probably not surprising that they were involved quite heavily as well. Obviously, 26 flights on the plane that are in the books.
That goes beyond, say, just a chance meeting or an unfortunate coincidence sort of
I
thing.
know. And he still claims that he was unaware of any of the wrongdoings of Epstein throughout that time.
God, even 26 holidays to American Virgin Islands is excessive.
I know. It's mad.
That's what he's obviously claiming.
I'm assuming, yeah, that is what he's claiming, but I'm not sure entirely. I don't know how else he could do it. So yeah, there obviously would have been serious benefits to Epstein of revealing these names in exchange for, at the very least, a more comfortable time in prison, because in all likelihood he probably wouldn't get released if found guilty, but by revealing names he could maybe shift it from like a supermax horrible cell to a bit more relaxed. And
A few days off of work.
yeah, or just goes back to his 6 off, 1 on days.
6 days in the US Virgin Islands and his island.
So Jeffrey Epstein was put on suicide watch 2 weeks before his death after an alleged attempt to kill himself on the 23rd of July, where he was found unconscious in his cell with injuries to his neck. So this suicide watch involved more regular checks from the guards and constant surveillance to ensure that he couldn't attempt suicide again. However, he was only on suicide watch for less than a week before his death, and the footage of his alleged suicide attempt the first time has gone missing.
This is probably a pretty obvious, stupid question, but I'm assuming he had way more security than the average prisoner as well, so this suicide watch should have been very over the top.
Yeah, so there basically were 2 FBI cameras on his cell at all times, and then a jail camera on his cell, with guards watching it at all times. But then every half an hour, 2 guards had to check him in the flesh at the cell as well.
Wow, and somehow, supposedly, he committed suicide.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So yeah, there was the first suicide attempt, but a lot of people think this was kind of fabricated to make the actual suicide look more realistic. Because like we say, there's no evidence of the first suicide attempt going on, and the footage has gone missing. I suppose you can say, well, it could have happened, and would we have footage anyway of it happening? I don't know, but people seem to think that's suspicious, and I'm kind of inclined to agree with them. And as we know, it's a bit of a common theme. Cameras seem to not be working at important moments. And on that note, on the day of his suicide, or day of his death, 2 FBI security cameras stationed directly outside of Epstein's cell were both broken in some capacity and were unable to film the event and catch a potential killer or filming his alleged suicide, thus leaving the question of his suicide unanswered in many's eyes. The first camera turned itself off, and the second one had all of its footage corrupted.
I'm sorry, but that's just got to be one of the most perfectly coincidental instances in any conspiracy theory ever mentioned. That's just perfect. I mean, FBI cameras really ought to be meticulously regulated on checking them just to make sure they're working.
I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but I guess people could theorize that it was some kind of, top hacker that somehow managed to hack into the FBI system just because of whoever wants Epstein dead is powerful enough to, get these top hackers.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I suppose it's strange that the cameras both failed in different ways. That one of them turned itself off, which I suppose you say was a hacker, and then the other one, footage just got corrupted for what was down as an unspecified reason. So it just seems like clutching at straws for me. It's like as if someone in the planning room's gone, right, should we say they both turned off? It's like, no, it's too obvious. Say one of them turned off.
At least if both went off for the same reason, there's a bit more, viability. Oh, there's a little power cut in there.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Just an incredibly localized EMP.
But yeah, on the night he died, guards were required to check on inmates, specifically Epstein, every 30 minutes. However, this did not happen. The two guards responsible for keeping an eye on Epstein the night he died have been charged with falsifying records and conspiracy after allegedly falling asleep and shopping online rather than checking on him and then lying about it in court. The logistics of the suicide are also very questionable, given Epstein was 6 feet tall and was hanging from a bunk bed that was no taller than 6 feet.
Can you just imagine, though, you're the two FBI guards looking on Suicide Watch for Epstein, and you're just shopping on Amazon, minimize it, and the camera's back up, and you just see Jeffrey Epstein. You'd be absolutely shitting.
He'd be like, okay, perfect, job's done, right, let's get back to my online shopping.
But you corrupt the footage on.
So yeah, the bunk bed that he was found hanging from was no taller than 6 feet, which meant he had to raise his legs whilst hanging in order to make sure that he actually hung. This is unusual, given normally a stool or something is used and then kicked away, so that there isn't the option of putting your feet down. Potentially this can be explained as him using what he had to hand, as he was unlikely to have a stool or light to attach a noose to. However, it's still just logistically be very difficult, especially because when you're hanging, your body kind of goes into panic mode, you go into survival mode, which is why people kick a chair under them, so they don't have the option of getting free. Whereas if he literally just put his feet down, he would have been all right. And I think...
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible self-control, zen levels of self.
Yeah.
To not put your feet down, to hold just the legs in like a flex position to stop them hitting the ground, which you just think is impossible given every single urge your body is fighting to alleviate the pressure on your neck, otherwise you're going to die.
Yeah, exactly. So photos showed the deep bloodied cut to his neck following the alleged hanging and a severed neck bone, along nooses that were made out of an orange bedsheet. One of them was looped through a bedpost in his cell. Now, the noose itself, according to the inquiry, was cut down with scissors, but the pictures show no signs of any incisions and the noose is still tied, as if it's been untangled and retied. And the noose doesn't match the marks around his neck. The noose made from the bedsheet is far thicker than the very thin, wire-like marks found on Epstein's neck. So I suppose if you think of you're hanging yourself with like a duvet cover or something like that, it's not going to give a very thin line around your neck. It's going to be quite spread out because it's obviously quite thick. So the marks don't really mark it. Yeah, exactly. It's odd. So other photos of the cell, show multiple bottles of prescription pills, electrical cords, and enough bedsheets for several inmates, despite Epstein not sharing a cell at the time of his death. The cord of his sleep apnea machine that was in his cell. So for those who don't know, sleep apnea is like a condition where you stop breathing at night when you're asleep, which he had, apparently. But he had a machine in his room that you basically put a mask on and it gives you oxygen while you sleep. But the cord of that machine that was in his room is far more consistent with his injuries, which leads many to believe he was actually strangled with this cord, then hung with the bedsheet after his death to make it look like suicide.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems a much more plausible explanation. It's quite difficult to say hang yourself with a sleep apnea machine. They're quite cumbersome.
Yeah, I suppose the cord of that matches the wounds around his neck, and I suppose, the theory saying somebody broke in and wrapped that around his neck, started pulling and then strangled him that way, which I'll come on to maybe a little bit more support for that theory now. So Jeffrey Epstein's brother refused to believe the official story that his brother killed himself and hired an examiner to do a second autopsy, which found broken bones in his neck, far more consistent with a homicidal strangulation rather than a hanging. One of the broken bones in Epstein's neck was described as unheard of in a suicidal hanging by an expert. Former New York medical examiner Dr. Michael Barden said that the forensic evidence released so far, including autopsy, point much more to a murder and strangulation rather than a suicide and suicidal hanging. Autopsy photos show the 66-year-old's broken hyoid bone near his Adam's apple. Dr. Barden said that the paedophile's neck being broken in 3 places was unheard of in suicide. Over 1,000 jail-hanging suicides in the New York state prisons over the past 40-50 years, and no one has had these 3 fractures.
So if we're going to entertain the theory, it's almost a certainty that he was bumped off. You think that the people responsible would take meticulous care to make sure the injuries were consistent with hanging with the right implements available to Epstein?
Well, I don't think they would, just for the reason that a lot of people think that the autopsy was all bought and paid for, because the official autopsy, and the one that still stands, says that it was clearly a suicide. It was only when Epstein's brother refused to believe this and hired his own one, and some independent ones done by, I think, NBC and Fox News have also come back with the same conclusion as the independent one done by the brother, saying actually this was looks far more like a murder than a suicide. But the official autopsy from the local justice system and the prison, they say it's a suicide. So I suppose you can say that result was bought by the people who had him murdered as a cover-up, and they didn't anticipate second autopsies being done privately. So in the interview with Fox News, just to reiterate, he said that the evidence points towards homicide rather than suicide. Those 3 fractures are extremely unusual in suicide hangings and would only really occur had somebody tied a noose to the top of a building, jumped out of the window and fallen 5 stories, because it would break your neck so viciously, rather than fallen at most a couple of inches from his bed. Hanging does not cause broken bones, homicide does. Those are Barden's final words on the matter. Epstein also had bruising on both wrists, hemorrhaging in his left shoulder, and a graze on his left arm, as if having been in some sort of fight or putting up a struggle. The autopsy observed on behalf of Epstein's family said that staff broke prison protocol by removing his body before it could be photographed in situ and by rushing him to the hospital after he was found dead. So basically, when normally there's a death in a prison, you leave everything as it is. It's the same with a normal crime scene as well. Take photographs before you touch or move anything, and then you get on with your investigation. Whereas with Epstein, the first thing they did was allegedly cut him straight down, didn't take any pictures, and then it was only a few days after that any pictures were taken of the room, by which time, I mean, they weren't really going to tell you anything. It's certainly probable that the guards were paid off to act ignorantly, and then perhaps an inmate was paid to commit the murder and make it look like suicide, especially given the sheer amount of powerful and wealthy individuals that would benefit from Epstein failing to testify and unveiling the thousands of names. Interestingly as well, because his death was ruled a suicide, all criminal charges associated with Epstein were dropped, which included any investigations into his sex trafficking ring with him specifically, which has potentially spared over 1,000 names linked to him. So that kind of concludes it. What do you reckon, guys?
I think that final point there is quite shocking, really, you think. So almost the perfect get-out-of-jail card if you don't want to answer for your crimes. If all charges dropped upon your suicide. I just can't
exactly.
get my head around that. Like, surely there is enough grounds to continue investigating given the magnitude of his reported operation at the time.
And apparently, because obviously Maxwell has now come under fire for it as well, the only reason she's being investigated is because she was already being investigated alongside Epstein. So apparently they already had plans to bring her in, but they're basically saying they're not going to look any deeper into Epstein's part of the case now that he's killed himself. Behind the guise of, well, he's dead, what can we do? There's no point in investigating it now, whereas in actual fact, you could uncover a hell of a lot more by carrying on investigating it.
Yeah, so it's like peace of mind to the victims' families as well and stuff like that. You just think, just for say, yes, they're telling the truth in the end, and Epstein really is this criminal mastermind with his sex trafficking organisation.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I guess if Maxwell does get charged, I guess that will confirm it anyway.
One thing that's just dawned on me about the Maxwell thing, actually, is the most likely scenario, logically, that she's just going to go into court and just put everything on Epstein, blame everything on him because he can't answer for himself, and just kind of clear everyone else's name and say, oh, he was the only one recruiting, he's the only one doing anything.
I guess it could be a mix of that and just point blank denying it, really. She's always denied it in the past. You know, when Epstein did get charged, she has come out and said, look, I've got nothing to do with it, so maybe she is willing to pin it totally on him. I guess even the victims in the court will still have evidence stacked up against her too, and will want revenge on her in some way.
Probably just say she was coerced, wouldn't she, like forced to do it?
Yeah, I do think that is her only defence, isn't it?
Depends what advice her legal team ends up giving her or what sort of position they decide to take.
Do we know if she's using like the same lawyers as Epstein? You know, Alan Dershowitz, famous.
No, I don't know.
Because I really don't know if she's trying to totally distance herself now from the whole Epstein thing. Won't use his lawyers or ever really use his estate and money again.
Because she hasn't even been photographed yet, so it's all been kept very quiet at the moment. The whole investigation with Maxwell.
Funnily enough, I did stumble upon a site that tells you names of prisoners, inmates in New Hampshire. Typed in her name and nothing came up at all. Obviously, I think it's a lot more secretive, so I really doubt it'd be that publicly available. But according to Reddit, if you believe it, some guy did actually ring all the prisoners in New Hampshire and found out that she's staying at one of them. But that's Reddit, so who knows how true.
Take that with a big grain of salt, I think.
More than a grain. Pacific Ocean's worth. So yeah, we have some ratings from you two on that one.
You're doing very well at this stage now to find anyone who genuinely believes that Epstein committed suicide. So it's outside of maybe the circle he could have potentially implicated. I think it's one of the most widely believed conspiracy theories in recent times. So much so it's just become a meme now. Obviously, a reminder that Epstein didn't kill himself.
Even Ricky Gervais said it in his Golden Globes opening monologue. So the added weight of saying it directly to the elites is a real kind of...
Oh yeah, that definitely had some people squirming. I said this whole piece during that was quite fun to watch.
I mean, it did as well. They weren't laughing. It was a whole crowd of, they were not happy with it.
Oh yeah, I think Tom Hanks was certainly, remember he was some concerned face. There's got some face for absolute pictures.
Anyone laughing was Adam Driver.
Oh, he was creasy. That was a great I remember there was one person who was absolutely creasing at it, which means he's done nothing wrong.
I'm sure there'd be many sweating in the audience, apart from Prince Andrew if he was.
But
yeah, actually, I saw something from Donald Trump Jr. on Instagram where he put hashtag Epstein didn't kill himself. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
he's actually giving his dad like his best mate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's the news today of Donald Trump's niece coming out to speak out against Donald Trump and how much of an evil man he is. So who knows in that family?
It seems like everyone's out for themselves at times. I mean, the whole Trump side of it, like, especially the younger ones, like to be going with this whole counterculture and edgy element to political campaigning. I think if that does include Epstein didn't kill himself, just forgetting the wider implications of the fact that his dad's name was on multiple contact numbers in the Black Book, and it's also circled as well, so implying extra importance. But I suppose, as for believability, is it the fact that Epstein didn't kill himself, or in fact believing that he did?
So a 10 out of 10 would be firm belief that he was murdered.
Right. Well, in that case, I'm going to go for a 9 out of 10 on this one. Just you never know. He could have been some sort of contortionist that was able to manipulate his body in such a way to prevent his legs touching the ground, and to also cause such unique injuries to his neck, given the implements at hand.
And he didn't fancy testifying.
Didn't fancy testifying, no. He used some advanced mind powers to corrupt both the cameras, brain the security guards into doing some Amazon shopping and falling asleep on the job, just to make sure to protect his friends in high places. But the conspiracy theories and all, as with anything connected to Epstein, this gigantic network, solid 9 out of 10 again.
Very nice, thank you. Luke, what do you reckon?
So, yeah, kind of following on from Callum, it's a great conspiracy. It's super interesting, and I mean, everything just seems so fishy regarding the whole Epstein case. But even before the suicide, everything just seems so fishy, and then the suicide just made it even more. Yeah, just some of the names that it could implicate, and the fact that he's no longer alive to be able to implicate them. I mean, obviously, huge conspiracy is going to come out of that, and just the way it will happen. So I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10 for a conspiracy. Yeah, so for believability, just given the sheer scale of the case, you really think the FBI would put their best people on suicide watch watching him, not people, who are going to go on Amazon and start doing some shopping. And, you think they'd have like the British Guard outside Buckingham Palace, that kind of level of concentration where they're just focused on the screen non-stop for 8 hours for their shift. I mean, you just simply can't not look at them. And the fact 2 cameras went out for different reasons as well is just ridiculous. And then all the other inconsistencies you mentioned with the autopsy, I mean, it's hard to really believe this, even though we're told to believe it. It's just because your brain just says, nah, it's not true. He clearly was murdered. So I'm going to give it high as well. I'm going to give it a 8.5 out of 10.
One more thing. It's the whole idea of even on suicide watch. The first place you mentioned seems very suspect.
Probably in all likelihood, that first suicide attempt was either a failed assassination attempt or just a cover-up and nothing ever happened, just so it adds a bit more weight to it.
Can you imagine now if Maxwell commits suicide?
I just think they wouldn't dare, as much as they'd like.
Imagine if she actually did commit suicide.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be so much as a smoking gun, rather than a whole smoking army.
Yeah.
People have already printed T-shirts saying Maxwell didn't kill herself. So everyone's preempting it.
I mean, who's buying that? I mean, respectfully, that committed conspiracy theories.
I've got one on now, mate.
Co-Conspirators merch.
Just go wear it outside Buckingham Palace.
But yeah, I'll quickly give my rating. I think it's very similar to you guys. I think overall conspiracy theory, that this, hugely powerful man, very well connected in very dodgy ways with hugely famous people, is about to testify, and then the day before his court date, he is found dead in very suspicious circumstances. I think doesn't really get much bigger, so I'm going to go 9.5 out of 10 for the overall conspiracy. And then believability, again, as we've touched on, like cameras not working, the wounds not matching up, it being a unique injuries to have during a hanging. All these things make me think, I'm very, very confident that he didn't kill himself. So I'm thinking 9.5 out of 10 for believability.
Ooh, that's high.
It's high, unlike his bunk bed.
Oh.